Okay, it's about time for us to begin our class this morning. We are starting a study of the book of 1 Corinthians this morning. Let me just say a little bit about the notes that are being sent out. I don't know if we'll even get to 1 Corinthians this morning. We're going to try to. We may get there. But let me start by saying I did not produce the outlines that I'm sending out to you. Because usually everything I produce, I'm using the English Standard Version. But I don't know how long ago it was, but I found some question and answers for every chapter of the book of 1 Corinthians online several years ago, and I had downloaded it, and I was looking at it, so, well, if I ever do a class on 1 Corinthians, I'll do it. So I was looking at it Friday, and I go, I couldn't even figure out where I got it type thing. So a little investigating, I found it online, and for the life of me, I can't think of the guy that wrote it, but I'll find out who that is for you. But he was a preacher in the Lord's Church several years ago. I don't know if he's still living. But a lot of his writings, he's got some studies on every passage, and they're chronicled online. There's just so many things that are available online. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share these with you to do. I don't plan to go through these every week. I went through this morning in about 30 minutes, and I answered all the questions for Chapter 1. I will tell you I cheated a little bit because I used my computer program. So you can do that if you want to do that. But one of the things that will be a little hint here, it is in the King James Bible. So if you don't have a King James, or if you do have a King James, you haven't used it in a while, get that thing out, blow off the cover, open it up to 1 Corinthians, and you can fill out the questions. If it's not something you want to do, then that's fine. But I found it very, very helpful and beneficial, and covers pretty much what the chapter covers. So I'll be going through them and doing them myself. And if there's a particular question about one you had a hard time trying to figure out, like couldn't find it right there in the verses, like that first one, on which of Paul's journeys was 1 Corinthians written. It was written on the third journey. He was in Ephesus when he wrote that, and that is, of course, it doesn't say in the book of Acts when he wrote these letters, but we know that he was coming to the end of his journey at the end of chapter 18 that we'll be looking at. So if you have your Bibles, go to Acts 18. We'll probably spend most of our time in Acts 18 today. But he ends up going back and making a report, and then finally, actually in verse 23 is the start of the third journey. Verse 22 is the end of the second journey. That's of chapter 18. Acts 18:22, when he landed at Caesarea, he went up and greeted the church and then went to Antioch. And then verse 23, after spending some time there, he departed, and he went from one place to the next through the region of Galatia and Phrygia, strengthening all the disciples. So that's his third journey that begins there. Don't know that he ever gets back through Corinth, but he's willing to go there. Seems to be in pretty good hands there, and so he doesn't feel so much the pressure to get there. He ends up spending about a year and a half there. So chapter 18, the church is established in his second journey there. That's answer number 2. So that you won't find in the text, but you'll want to know about this, and you'll be able to read chapter 1 and pretty much be able to answer the rest of the questions. I went ahead and wrote out the verse out beside each one. So if you get stuck on one, we'll try to make a time during the lesson, and you can raise your hand and ask me, what about number, and see how you go. But if you have, like say, it's a cheat, but hey, that's okay. Use it. Use your tools. If you've got a computer version of it, then use it. So I'm excited about this transition to a new study. And so I have been immersed into the world of the Peloponnesian Isles, the area of the southern part of Greece that is so ancient. You talk about Greek. I mean, we're talking about predating the power of Rome and the influence of Rome. So Corinth predates that, at least the knowledge that we have, the history that's there. And so when you think about Greek history, you got to think about Greek mythology. And who was the chief of the gods of the Greeks? Remember? Who was the chief of the gods of the Greeks? Zeus. Zeus was the chief of the gods of Greece. So, everything about Zeus and, reading about, hearing about various different things. And in Greek mythology, it's all kind of founded in the ancient history of Corinth and all the various areas. I've never been to Corinth, but boy, I want to go there, especially after spending time. Let me encourage you, if you like to watch videos on YouTube, go to YouTube and type in Corinth 3D or Corinth 4K. That's the quality level. Some of the most beautiful scenery, and just really, they show you some of the early ruins, and it just makes the Bible come alive. So you may not ever go there, but man, we're living at a time when the world, we can bring it home to us. And so some of the pictures that you see on the screen, I just pulled that off a video there, and so that picture comes out off of a video on YouTube. So just utilize the tools that you have and learn about the history. And so I just want to show you kind of some of the things that I found. First of all, I guess the area around Corinth. If you look kind of at the little bitty map here, you kind of see the greater picture here. This is a zoomed in area. If you look at the little red box, that's what this whole map is about. And so if you look at the setting here, you look at Corinth as being kind of right in the middle of ancient Greece. Now, it doesn't show this side. Italy's over here. So Rome's over here, the other side of the Adriatic. Greece is here, and then Asia is here. And so I didn't show all the things up here, but you got Thessalonica up here, and you've got Philippi is up here in this area. And then you cross over into Asia, and you've got Ephesus, and you got the 7 churches of Asia that you read about in the book of Revelation. That's kind of the area there. And so what's so neat to me about Corinth is that the location of Corinth is kind of right here in what they call an isthmus area, where the land kind of comes together. And it's the kind of the thinnest area. And I never knew about this, but as far back as Nero in the 1st century, there was a dream he had to dig a waterway right across the area of Corinth so that ships, rather than having to drive hundreds of miles around, kind of like Panama Canal type thing, that his dream was to build a canal that would go all the way across. And so he started digging, and he dug, and they dug for generations. You know when that thing was finished? in the middle of the 1800s. That's how big it is, and that's how long that they took to do it. Yeah, the Mediterranean's kind of on the bottom. This is really more the Adriatic over to the Aegean Sea, where the red square is. No, it wasn't there. That's what they dug. So if you see this line here, right here, they called it, let's see, I got to get up closer to it. The Diolkos is this blue line that goes across. Now, you might not be able to see it, but there's a red line that goes, kind of starts below it and ends out above it. What they did for 2,000 years before this thing was finished, what they did was they came up with a pulley system. And they would use pig fat. And what they would do is if a ship came up and they paid whatever it cost to do it, they would have workers that would unload the ship, get the ship, and pull it up on a skid that they would pull with ropes, and they would pull that boat all the way across. And then at the end, right before they put it back in the water, they would refill the vessel and off it would go. They did that for nearly 2,000 years, until, 1,800 years. Well, no, the Arabs would not, and the Jews would not. So this would have definitely been a Greek enterprise. Yeah, it's a good point. It's a good point. So, those, and of course, there were times that slaves, I'm sure there were some Jewish slaves, remember the story of the prodigal son. There were some times that slaves might have been thrown into this type work as well. In fact, I'm sure that's how a lot of it was done. But you can't see as well here, but you can see kind of some of the setting here. To the south of Corinth was this, what they would call the Acro-Corinth. Acro means raised, the raised Corinth. And so visualize this mountain, ancestrally visualize the mountain back 500 years BC. What would have been up there on the top of this mountain would have been something like what you see in Athens. Like if you look at a picture of Athens, you've got the Acropolis there. I mean, you got this massive city, and then you got the Acropolis that's up there on this mountain. Well, at one time, they had one just like it. But around 146 BC, they had an uprising against Rome. And Rome was kind of still trying to flex their muscles, get ready to become the world power that they became. And so what they did was they rose up against Rome, and Rome just came in and squashed them. And when they did that, they left not one stone above the other. And so you'll see ruins on top of this mountain, but the ruins came long after. In the 1500s, there were the French put some things up there because it was an occupied area by the French. And so any of the ruins didn't have anything to do with pre-146 because, they can't hardly find anything. They found some pottery, and there's a neat little place there, a little museum. You can go and see some of the ancient stuff. So from 146 to about 44 BC, so about 100 years, Corinth was completely cut off from the world. All the grass grew. It just took over the forest. Nobody lived there. And then around 44, Julius Caesar, just before he died, Julius decided that he would sell some of the land to the wealthy. And so they repopulated that area, and they came in and settled into the area that Paul would have visited in the first century. So when you think about Paul going into the city of Corinth, you're talking about a city that looks like a new city. What's a new city? Las Vegas. Las Vegas is pretty new. It's probably runs its history back. I mean, to what you see is Las Vegas. A lot of glitter. Of course, I don't know that they had a lot of the bright lights or anything, but it would have been kind of the newbie sort of place that would have been attractive, that would have brought people in from all over the world. You have the pagans, you have the immorality, you have the tables of chance or whatever they were. Las Vegas is really a good explanation. So there wasn't any really ancient stuff there. Everything was gone before 44. So it's a new town. And so Paul comes there, everything's glittery, everything's beautiful, everything's wonderful, and he comes in there and he talks to a group of people that have just completely enslaved themselves to self. The gratification of the flesh. Everything that's about me and makes me feel good. Even their gods were gods that they control. They could put them in their pocket when they want them. They could pull them out, look at them, and praise them, fall down on their knees, worship them when they wanted to do so. And so that was the world Paul was dealing with when he came to Corinth. It would be just like you or me starting a brand new congregation of the Church of Christ in Las Vegas, Nevada. Can you imagine the challenge that would be before you? Well, that's what Paul's got to deal with. So, this is kind of a reconstruction. It's the second century. It's the closest I could find, kind of our second century reproduction of what it would have looked like. So this is post-Paul, but basically this is what Paul would have seen had he gone there. They would have had the arenas, places there that had a number of temples. Now, that picture you saw at the first, the Temple of Apollo, right in the middle of it, that was that one. This is probably, they don't know for sure what temple this is, but probably to the goddess Athena. Would have been that temple, but they had little temples everywhere, all around. What you want to know about, though, is the places we're going to read about in Acts 18 that Paul had to do with. Paul goes into an area that is, let's see, he goes into this area right here. And it would have been the area called the Stoa, the South Stoa. What we're going to see when we go in fact, let's look at Acts 18 and verse 1. After this, Paul left Athens, went to Corinth, and he found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, recently came from Italy. We saw where Italy, well, we didn't see Italy, but it's off to the left, and the other inlet. Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. And he went to see them, and because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them, and he worked for them, and he worked, not for them, but, and he worked, for they were tent makers by trade. So, the reason a place called the Stoa would have been significant. You can imagine with a prime location where they're pulling stuff off of ships and they're dragging it across, that some of the things that were on the ships might be things that they might like to sell. And so you can imagine that some of those things would have appeared at these store areas, Stoa areas, for sale. This essentially, this section here, and here's another one here along this line. These were the Walmarts and the Kmarts of the day. And so Paul comes into town, and he comes and he finds somebody there that are members of the church. And they are not only members of the church, but they do the same things he does. And so he connects himself with them. I would imagine, it doesn't say this, but I would imagine one of these little storefronts right here, one of these little alcoves, was probably, Aquila and Priscilla's tent shop. And Paul would have connected himself to the tent shop selling his wares, providing for himself. One of the things that you'll see through Corinthians is that Paul never requires, never even really asks, the Corinthians to contribute to his efforts. And there's a lot of thought about why he didn't, what his motive was. But one of the reasons why he didn't do it is because he pretty well took care of himself. He provided for his own needs. Now, sometimes he'll say, and I think he says it over in 2 Corinthians, I could have charged you. I could have made you pay, could have encouraged payment, but I didn't lay that to you. And probably one of the biggest reasons because he felt like it would be a stumbling block. Why do you suppose he might think that requiring payment to him would be a stumbling block for them? Yeah, for them. Why might it be a stumbling block for them if he says, I need you to help me along my way? Sorry? Well, Philippians and other passages talk about that, man's worthy of his hire. I don't think that's the concern there. Let's go back to our map and see. If we've got an isthmus here, or this area here, a narrowing area, and you've got all this back and forth of ships and back and forth of commerce, back and forth of trade, you get people who are on these ships, who get off these ships, and they're waiting for the boat to get to the other side. What are they going to do? What if you're a philosopher and you've kind of got this Socratic mindset? I'm a Socrates fan. What are you going to do? Well, I'm going to try to go somewhere like maybe right in here, this area here, and just tell people what I think. Tell them my philosophies. I think one of the reasons why Paul didn't excise money from the congregation was because he didn't want them to think that he was in it for money. He didn't want them, and they would be apt to, because, okay, here's another stranger coming through town. And he stopped, and his little story is he talks about this man named Jesus. He died, they put on a cross, he was buried, raised again. So as he says. And so maybe that was one of the reasons, or one of the concerns. So this area, it's also this area right here, I'm trying to think of the name. There's a particular name. There's a, right here in the middle, there's just, you see some kind of columns around it. It's hard to see. But there's kind of an area where you can stand. It's called the Bema. It was where the consul would come and do orations, or where he would make judgments. Now, we're going to read about Gallio in a few moments, who was the proconsul of the city of Corinth. So what would the proconsul do? Do you know of any other proconsuls that we read about in the Bible? Who was the proconsul of Judea during the days of Jesus, or in the trial of Jesus? When Jesus went to the cross, who's the proconsul? Huh? Pontius Pilate. We're going to read about Gallio, who was the Pontius Pilate of Corinth. Huh? I think he's more like Andy Bashir. He's the governor of the area. Yeah, he's the magistrate of the people. However, it's different from Bashir. Bashir's elected, whereas his work was appointed. His was appointed. And it was only for 2 years, and we get into that a little bit later. But so if there was ever kind of ruckus, this is where they would come to in the town, and it's called the Bema. The judgment seat is the original meaning. So you want to keep that in mind, because that's where Paul's going to be brought to. And Gallio's going to have to determine, okay, what are we going to do with him? So just keep that in mind. Here's some of the ancient coins. Ancient coins of Corinth with Athena on one side, Pegasus. Remember Pegasus? What do we know about Pegasus in Greek mythology? It's something you wish that you could do in your car when you're in bumper-to-bumper traffic. What do we know about Pegasus? It had wings. It could fly. Guess where Pegasus was found the first time? Pegasus was found in Corinth. Yeah. Athena. No, we would not have had her. They all look alike. Yeah. Lady Liberty, probably. I can't remember who. Yeah. So there, and of course there's some others here, and this would paint around the time. Nero here. Livia, I don't know who Livia was. It might have been another rendition of Athena on first century coins. But then there was this, on the top of Acrocorinth, there was this, this temple. Like what you see when you look at pictures of Athens. And of course, again, it was destroyed in 146. But that would have been on the backs of of some of the first century coins. That's kind of an artist rendition of what it would have looked like. At the top of the Acrocorinth, there would have been this beautiful, temple to the goddess Aphrodite. I've been saying Athena. Athena was down below, Aphrodite at the top. So one of the ruins that you see is this. There used to be a fountain here, and in ancient Greek mythology, Pegasus, the winged horse, never been ridden by man, was given to Bellerophon to defeat Chimera. A chimera was a fire-breathing monster with a head of a lion, a goat head that stuck out of his back, and a snake head in his tail. I guess at the end of his tail. So that's, it's part of their mythology. But then if you go there and you see these ruins, you see where these stories came from, where they were born. So here's kind of to me, I think a great picture. You got Acrocorinth, obviously, just looming off in the distance. Visualize Paul going into this city and what's before him, and the idea of it being, to the goddess Aphrodite. Here in the foreground are all the ruins from the days of Paul. So, zooming in a little bit, you would have the Stoa. It's kind of the flip side of how we were looking at it a while ago, just kind of turned around. So you have the Stoa. You would have had the little stores that would have been up and down through here. Then you would have had the Agora. This is the area where the people came. I couldn't think of the word a while ago. The Agora was the place where the people came together to talk. This would have been the very place where Paul would have preached when he wasn't in the synagogue. He could very well have preached there. But the important thing is the Bema, and there's the Bema there. So there's some pictures of the stoa, kind of some of the insets back to the bank. You got the temple to Apollo there in the distance. You've got the agora there in the foreground, and with the bema right there on the top. So if you go there today, one of the major things you're looking for is this bema, because you know this is the place where Paul ended up when he was arrested and brought before the proconsul. So here's a picture just looking straight on at the bema. This is first century. This is a first century raised up place. So you can imagine what it would have been like. Somebody's on trial. They're brought before the proconsul. He's sitting up there on his chair. They drag this horrible violator of the law of the land, Paul. They drag him before the proconsul. Here's the man that, and we'll see what the scriptures say, how he deals with the situation. And so the picture on the left, though, is if you're standing on the bema, standing up here and looking out, this is what you would see, type here. So if you visit there today and you go up on the bema, here's something that you see. There's a block on the right-hand side of it that says, "For this slight momentary affliction is prepared for us the eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison." 2 Corinthians 4, verse 17. Now, that was added. That wasn't from the first century. But that says a little bit about the significance of the location and how archaeologists believe that what they have found here was the actual place where Paul came and where Paul was tried and where he was found innocent and he was able to carry on his ministry for a year and a half. He was there. So, well, we'll talk about, let's stay here for a few minutes. Maybe back here at the bema, looking at the bema for a few minutes. Let's read on. So it says in verse 4 that he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and trying to persuade Jews and Greeks. So we would assume that if he went to synagogue, there would be Jews and there'd be proselyte Jews. What's a proselyte? They probably were Greek speaking, but what more specifically? They were converts to Judaism. They would take a male and circumcise him if he wanted to take on or become a Jew. And so you had these proselyte Jews that were Greek. And so they would have been at synagogue. But then there would have been people that came up and said, let's look at this tent here. We're probably going to need that. We got this trip coming up. We better buy us a tent. And they're looking at the material. And are you the same? Yeah, I made that tent. Well, what do where are you from? Well, I'm from down at Tarsus. Well, what are you doing up here? Type thing. Well, actually, I'm a tent maker by trade, but you know what my life is really all about? And then the conversation changes. So Paul would have been using a lot of his opportunities to talk to people, Jew and Greek, about the gospel of Jesus. See yourself there. What would you do? How would you use the occasions that come to you? So, when Silas and Timothy arrived from Macedonia, Paul was occupied with the word, testifying to the Jews that the Christ was Jesus. How do you prove that Jesus is the Christ? How would you prove to a Jew today that Jesus is Christ? Huh? Well, some people would say wasn't no way back then. But what did they do? Well, he obviously was successful. To me, one of the things that would have been most powerful is if he goes in the synagogue and he pulls up, he says, let's read. And he said, give me that Isaiah scroll. And he scrolls along, goes to Isaiah 53. And he just starts reading about the suffering servant. As a lamb, led like a lamb before the slaughter, yet he did not open his mouth. I mean, it would have been easier for him to say, hey, I'll tell you somebody this actually happened to. This happened to Jesus of Nazareth. He didn't defend himself. He could have done this to a lot of different passages in the Old Testament. He'd go to Psalm 22. We could spend hours in Psalm 22 and look, a lamb brought before the slaughter. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Right there. What in the world did David mean by that? But yet it's a passage that's used to describe what Jesus said when he was on the cross. He just quoted a verse out of the book of Psalms. What was that all about? There were a lot of things that Jesus said, well, this is what the prophets said were true. You see, Jesus fulfilled prophecy like no other person could have fulfilled prophecy. I think he goes in the synagogue and he just says, look, everything in the prophets were about Jesus. Everything they foretold was about Jesus. And I can prove it. And you might look at one and you say, well, that don't prove anything. But how about two? What if you took three? What if you could look at 5 different things that were said about Messiah and be able to show that Jesus fulfilled every one of them? What about 10? Do you think it would be possible to come up with 15 things that the prophets said about Messiah that Jesus fulfilled? Now, 15's a little much, don't you think? I mean, 15. Maybe 13, but not 15. Not 20. Certainly not 20. Not 25. Scholars tell us that there are over 300 different prophecies in the Old Testament that Jesus fulfilled. How could people scattered over hundreds of years foretell about one person who would come along to lead his people, and Jesus somehow, some way, fulfill every single one of them? See, Paul didn't just go in there and said, y'all please believe in Jesus. He really is a good person. He gave them proof. He went in these synagogues and he laid down and he said, okay, I'm going to appeal to your reasoning power. If this is true and this is true, if he foretold this and it came true, and he foretold this and it came true, and he foretold that and it came true, and just go down the list. And Jesus fulfilled 300 of them. Probably wouldn't need that many. You're going to get some Jews that are going to say, maybe he was the Messiah. In fact, you're probably going to get a fair few of those of that group that are going to say, there's no way it wasn't Jesus. He had to have been the Messiah. And so that, Paul goes in these new towns. First thing he does, he goes to a Christian, connects him with some Christians, Aquila and Priscilla. They'd been over in Rome. Claudius kicks all the Jews out because he's scared they're going to take over. And that's true. That actually happened in history, so we're able to date somewhat of when all these events are taking place. That's one thing we know about Luke. Luke is extremely mindful of world events that he cites to show the proof that what he was saying actually happened or when it happened. And so one of those is right here. You look historically, Suetonius and other writers have written, actually Claudius did. The father of Nero, actually he cleared out the city of all the Jews. And Christianity, as far as as far as Claudius was concerned, was just another Jew. It's a Jewish religion. So Christianity was kicked out with the rest of them. And that's what Aquila and Priscilla, they had to leave town. Where they go, well, let's just go over to Greece. And they settle in Corinth and are there. So our time is getting away from us. And I had really hoped I'd be finished with chapter 18. So you go ahead and read ahead. Go through this. If you're reading in your translation and some of the words seem a little odd to you, pull out your King James and look, and you should be able to see it there. And if you have any questions about them, let me know, and I'll answer you. But really what we want to do in this study is just kind of look at a verse-by-verse study of Corinthians, 1 Corinthians. It's an interesting book. There's just a lot of things there that are controversial. They were controversial then, they're controversial now. And there'll be things. I remember one time I preached on the book of 1 Corinthians. I just went through and just did one chapter of another. Along about chapter 5, I was talking about the man living with his father's wife. We're talking about adultery. The church I was preaching for, we lost a family. They quit coming. Found out the reason was because they thought I was pointing them out. And I said, no, I wasn't pointing them out. I was just saying what the Bible says. We were going through. I wasn't trying to just come look at what was wrong in somebody's life and say, oh, let me work up a sermon. It was like, basically, and I don't mean to sound unloving with this, but if the shoe fits, wear it. The shoe is here. And whether it fits or not, we've got to decide. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work for us, and then we've got to receive the rewards or the punishments as a result. Thank you much. I hope you all be here tonight. We're going to have our scripture reading and prayer evening, and looking forward to that. Should be a great evening. We'll be meeting in here. So hope to see you then.